This time, Doug Polk does go for the raise. He blasted. It's a pretty cool spot, right? I was surprised to see the check raise, but hey, he did it. Doug Polk is not afraid. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com. I'm back with another hand from the high stakes 200-400 no limit challenge between Doug Polk and Daniel Negreanu. The players have been battling so far. Here's a hand from the first 200 hands that they played live. Make sure to go to PokerGO.com to watch the replay of that. It's a lot of fun. In this hand, notice the players are playing about 125 big blinds, or 130 big blinds deep. Negreanu opens it up with the king-2 of hearts, and Doug Polk calls with the ace-4 offsuit. I've gone through two previous hands from this match, so make sure you check those out on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/pokercoaching. Both of those were 3-bet and 4-bet pots. Now we're playing a single raise pot, and now the stack to pot ratio is very, very deep. So when you're playing shallower stacked, because the pot got substantially bloated pre-flop due to a 3-bet or 4-bet, quite often the strategies are not quite as complicated as when you're playing single raise pots with very, very deep stacks. So this is going to be a pretty interesting scenario. So Negreanu raises, Polk calls. You may say, should Polk 3-bet this ace-4? It's probably the best hand. Well, it turns out the answer is absolutely not. Ace-4 flat calls every single time. The problem with 3-betting a hand like ace-4 is that if you 3-bet and get 4-bet, you're going to have a very difficult time proceeding. And also when you 3-bet and get called, you're also not in like amazing shape because ace-4 is not actually that great of a hand. So easy call pre-flop. Flop comes. Doug Polk checks, as he should do with his entire range. And Daniel Negreanu makes a small bet. This is an interesting scenario because from a GTO point of view, Negreanu actually should not bet this flop every single time. I am not a world-class heads-up player. I want to make that very clear. I'm just showing you what the math says. And I would have bet more often than 60 or 59% of the time in this scenario. Notice he should be checking 41% of the time in this spot. But it turns out you can't just run your opponents over with mindless aggression heads up because they're going to have decent hands that are going to stick around often enough, right? This is a spot where, notice even a hand like king-2, if Negreanu has it, should check some portion of the time. This is roughly 15% of the time or so. And it's very, very difficult to implement this strategy right off the bat, right? As you see, the strategy basically bets with every hand some portion of the time and checks every hand some portion of the time, besides like, pocket kings and king-queen and pocket 5s, 4s, 3s, and 2s. But essentially, I guess there are a few other hands, but you have to make sure you are doing your best to replicate a somewhat balanced strategy in these scenarios. Notice that king-2 suited bets big, 15% of the time, checks 15% of the time, and bets small, one big blind, about 70% of the time. So interesting strategy here. Negreanu does go for the one big blind bet, which is what the solver recommends. Whenever the board is very uncoordinated, as it is here, you'll find that the solver mostly prefers that small bet, but even then it does bet 2/3 pot here, some portion of the time. Now for Doug Polk, ace-4 offsuit. What do you think? Turns out, very, very easy call. Whenever you're facing this small flop bet, you really can't fold all that often. As you see, Polk can only fold 19% of the time. And really, that's just with absolute trash, like 10-7, 10-6, 9-6, 8-6, etc. If he has really like anything at all, like board's king, 3-2. Notice the hand like 9-4. 9-4 opts to raise a decent amount of the time. Jack-4 raises a decent amount of the time. 8-5 raises a decent amount of the time. These are not particularly amazing hands on the king-4 or the king-3-2, but that is a strategy you need to be playing. You need to be aggressive. When Negreanu bets small, you're going to be able to make him fold out a lot of hands that don't have perhaps like ace-high or better or a draw. And, clearly going back to this flop strategy, Negreanu should be betting with a lot of stuff that can't continue, like Jack-10, right? This is a hand that just can't continue when it gets check raised, and you can apply a lot of aggression to all of these unpaired hands. So don't think your strategy is to just be very, very passive here. That said, with the ace-high hands that can reasonably win at showdown, you should typically do a lot of calling, as you see all the best ace-highs call. Notice that the ace-5 and ace-4 suited does raise every once in a while. Also, lots of various pairs raise, like you see ace-3 and ace-2 raising, queen-3 and queen-2 raising sometimes. It's a very, very interesting strategy. I would probably not have played this hand as aggressive as the solver recommends, and That's me learning to play poker better right here with you. I'm glad to be here with you, improving our skills together. Anyway, Polk does call, easy call. He checks turn. Negreanu now bets. This seems fine and logical. Negreanu uses a 2/3 pot size bet. As you see here, solver recommends 2/3, well, 3/4 pot or 33% pot bet size with the king 2 suited. Also betting lots of middle pairs again. Lots of bottom pairs are betting. All the best hands, of course, are betting. And then, again, a lot of sporadic bluffing with stuff like, what was the turn? A 7? King 3, 2, 7. Notice stuff like 10-8, 9-8, 10-9, Jack 6, Jack 5, Queen 4. Like all of these pretty trashy hands are, again, continuing to bet. Notice that Negreanu still should be checking about half the time in this scenario, but he is betting with a lot of reasonably trashy hands. So when you're betting with a lot of reasonably trashy hands, you have to make sure you're betting with your good hands too. I think a lot of people make the mistake in this scenario, though, of not betting stuff like 10-9. And they also make the mistake of not value betting thin enough, right? Because we see solvers betting stuff like ace 2 and queen 2 a decent chunk of the time. And most people just let that go check, check. He does bet. Doug Polk calls. You may say, can Doug Polk really call a 2/3 pot size bet here with ace high? Turns out, yes, very, very easily. Turns out ace high loves calling in this scenario. Ace high is great. It's often the best hand. It has very clean outs to the nuts. So super, super easy call with the ace high. Notice now Doug Polk doesn't raise the turn nearly as often. When Negreanu starts using a bigger bet size, and when you're facing bigger bet sizes in general, that indicates your opponent's probably a little bit more polarized, meaning they have mostly very good hands or mostly very weak hands. If we look at the solver, confirms that's true, right? Look at these hands that are betting big. It's like mostly two pair, two pair, two pair. Top pair, good kicker, right? Aces. And then just a bunch of garbage, right? The total garbage is also betting big some portion of the time. And when you're against a polarized range, you in turn don't get to raise very often at all. And when you are raising, you should very often raise with a polarized range. You can see here he's raising some two pairs, a few sporadic ace highs. Bottom pairs, interestingly enough, turn into bluffs sometimes. Stuff like 5-4 and 6-4 opts to raise for just junky draws. So whenever your opponent's polarized, if you are going to raise, and in general when you raise, for the most part, you're usually raising polarized as well. Polarized means you have the best hands or either total garbage or some sort of weak draw like 6-4 in the scenario on king 3, 2, 7. Anyway, Polk does call. River's a 4. Polk checks. Negreanu, of course, goes for the bet. He goes for a 2/3 pot size bet, which the solver confirms is perfectly viable. Interestingly enough, he could go for an overpot bet some portion of the time. I made these hands show up for 100% of the cells so we could go through and take a look at all the various bet sizes. Of course, when Negreanu bets the turn, notice he doesn't have king 2 all the time, but I made it fill up the whole cell so we could see it easier. So in this scenario, Negreanu's betting every single time with the king 2, it's basically the nuts, right? In this scenario, Negreanu's also betting with a bunch of junk. Take a look at the bluffs that opt to bluff basically every time, though. Essentially, all hands containing a 6 are bluffing a lot, and a lot of hands containing a 5 are bluffing a lot. And you may say, why are we bluffing with a 6 or a 5? Well, the 6 and the 5 makes it very difficult for Polk to have a straight, right? Whenever you are betting polarized, you very often want to make sure that your bluffs are hands that contain a very relevant blocker. A blocker is a hand that makes it less, or card that makes it less likely that your opponent has a strong hand. And right here, a strong hand is going to be a straight, right? So blocking 6-5 and ace-5 is very, very relevant, which is why the solver uses those hands as bluffs. And notice they are betting very big. This is another scenario where a lot of people just don't have very many bluffs in their range. You want to make sure when you're betting the river, you have an adequate amount of bluffs. Notice hands as strong as king 9 are checking, right? King 9 and king 8 actually just check it back, which may seem a little bit nitty, but when you bet the flop and the turn in this scenario, I guess you have to be kind of passive. Kind of surprised that king 9 cannot value bet here, but turns out it doesn't. Interesting. Again, we're learning together. I would have value bet king 9. So anyway, around to Doug Polk, and now I want you to ask yourself, what would you do in Doug Polk's shoes? Would you fold? Would you call? Or would you get frisky and put in a bluff raise? Take a second, think about it, commit to it, and type your answer in the comments below. Go ahead, do it. I'm going to go through and look at all of them once we get this video up. Let me know what you would do. All right, did you do it? I think this is a reluctant fold. You don't love it. It's a spot where the ace-4 may look like it has some showdown value, but in reality it doesn't. It's actually one of the worst hands in your range at this point. Because if you think about it, Doug Polk actually will have some straights here, which are the nuts. He's going to have a lot of kings. He's going to have some sevens. And this is a situation where when Negreanu bets the flop and the turn and the river, there's really not a whole lot you can do in the scenario besides play kind of tight. And it turns out Solver does recommend just folding with a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of raising. You may say, raise? Why would we raise? Well, because you want to make sure you have some bluffs in your range, right? If we take a look at Polk's raising range, it contains ace-5 for the straight, right? He does not have 6-5 in his range, I suppose, because he bets most of them previously. Some bottom sets, some 2 pairs, and then a whole lot of pocket 7s and pocket 6s and pocket 5s sporadically when he has it as bluffs. Notice the 6s is bluffing basically every time. That's because, again, like I said, you want to make sure you block hands like 6-5 from your opponent, right? This time, Doug Polk does go for the raise. He blasted. It's a pretty cool spot, right? I was surprised to see the check raise, but hey, he did it. Doug Polk is not afraid. And now, back to Negreanu. What should he do with the king 2? In this scenario, seems like the easiest call in the world for me. But if you look at the solver, interestingly enough, the solver actually recommends folding king 2 about 45% of the time. Can you believe that you're supposed to fold 2 pair? Like good 2 pair on this river 45% of the time? That seems insane to me. Notice that solver recommends folding the lower pairs almost always. King, queen folds almost always. And you're really only calling here with like pocket aces, pocket kings, some of the 2 pairs, the best 2 pairs, and sets, right? And then you're jamming with 6-5 for the straight plus a few blockers to the straight. Ask yourself, are you ever actually bluffing here? Could you imagine having a hand like 10-5 suited in this scenario? Betting the river, getting check raised huge, and then ripping it all in? Not gonna lie, I don't do a whole lot of jamming there. But in theory, we should be, right? This is a scenario where you need to make sure you have some bluffs. The most relevant bluffs are hands containing a 6 or a 5. And notice that there really aren't a ton of 6s here, so the 5s are all used across the board because they block ace-5 as well. So very, very cool spot. Interesting scenario too. I do want to point out that I think Dan Negreanu is playing a little bit trappy in this first 200 hands of this match because I think he thinks Doug Polk was going to be a little bit overly aggressive. And to be fair, I think he was probably right. Like right here, this bluff is indeed probably overly aggressive. Now, to be fair, maybe Doug Polk was picking the 2% of the time or whatever this is that he's supposed to bluff raise the ace-4. And if he did, you know, hats off to him. He's playing perfect GTO. But I have to imagine he was probably bluffing the spot a little bit more often than that. And if he is, I'm not saying he is, but if he is, then Negreanu in turn should actually call off with basically all of his bluff catchers. If Polk is bluffing too frequently, if you take a look at Negreanu's range here, it's actually all, or almost entirely, very, very good hands, like 2 pairs and better. The worst hand in his range to value bet here is actually king-queen, right? So instead of folding king-queen the majority of the time and folding 3-2 and 7-2 and 7-3 the majority of the time, you should actually call those very close to every time if you know your opponent's bluffing too often. You may think that if your opponent's bluffing too often, you should call a little bit more, but actually you should call substantially more. And in this scenario, if we go back to Doug Polk's range, you see that he does have some bluffs, but actually not all that many to bluff raise in this scenario on the river. His only real bluffs are really like pocket 6s, right? A whole bunch of pocket 6s. If he's bluffing with many more made hands than that, then he's going to end up bluffing just way, way, way too often. And if he's bluffing too often in turn, Negreanu has a very, very easy call. Can you hear my kids screaming out there? The kids weep when you bluff too often. All right, hope you all have a great day. I'm going to go over there and be a daddy and take care of the kids. If you enjoyed this video, click like, click subscribe, and I'll be back next time with some more high-stakes heads-up review. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more strategy lessons, pre-flop charts, and interactive quizzes, make sure you get your free membership to PokerCoaching.com right now at PokerCoaching.com/free. I'll talk to you next time.